So today we're going to talk about these three things. I think that artificial intelligence is a very important thing. It's a big elephant in the room today, and we need to talk about it sooner rather than later. And then terms and some hotkeys and stuff like that. So let's start off with artificial intelligence. What is it? It's actually not as spooky as it sounds. You're all familiar with algorithms. You know that it works in social media, that it works, the information that they gather from us is all done through algorithms. And so don't ask me what those are. I just know it's math, and I don't do math, but we know that they work. So really what this is just a really super sophisticated algorithm. So we've actually been working with artificial intelligence all this time. So it really shouldn't be so scary, but artificial intelligence simulates human thoughts and comprehension and problem solving. Now notice that word. It isn't, they do comprehend and they do all those things just like a human, they simulate it. So that's the key word. Remember that. So there are some people who are really super afraid of artificial intelligence. There's rumors flying all around. I mean, we've all seen these movies, big Terminators coming back from the future to either kill the person who started it or to fight with that person who started it. We've all seen those movies. I mean, how many Battlestar Galactica fans do I have? Not a one. Oh my goodness. If you like science fiction, you've really got to watch it. Not the one from the 70s. That one is crap. The newest one, it's like in the 2000s-ish. It's really compelling. It's a really well-made, well thought out series. There are several seasons of it, so you can really binge on it. And then of course there's iRobot and things like that. So people are getting really worried about it. We don't have an official policy in our department. I don't think there's even an official policy across the campus. They're kind of just leaving it to each individual teacher, which is great because I am not against it. I am not afraid of it. And I don't want you to be either. So let's talk more about it. I should just stay over here so that here's a video. And I was going to show it, but honestly, it's going to tell us the same things that we already know. There's nothing new in this. They're talking about jobs being taken and that sort of thing. So I'm just going to skip this. I will post, if it will let me. Here we go. I will post that link in case you can find lots and lots of AI subject matter on the computer. So I want to tell y'all a little story about myself. As you know, I'm older, way, way older than your parents. I may be like more grandparent in the grandparent zone here with you guys. But what that means is that I have seen a lot of changes in the graphic art industry, in the advertising industry. I started, and I'm going to tell y'all the truth so you will know how old I am when I start telling you this. I started in the industry in 1976, a long, long time ago. Almost 50 years ago. And I wasn't doing anything spectacular. I was a student at the art department in the graphic communication department. So I knew what I wanted to do, but I was really not learning what I wanted to learn in class. We were painting more than we were doing anything else. And I had opted not to do a studio degree plan because I didn't think I would ever make any money at it. I felt like graphic communication, I could actually get a job. And it's very true. You can actually get a job doing that. So I worked for a place called Impact Color. You've never heard of it. It's a little place that used to be here in Lubbock. And we mainly made maps for like Brownwood and all these small little towns in Texas and Arkansas. And it's one of those maps that you might pick up at a convenience store that's of this small little town that has ads laid around the perimeter of the map. Well, I made those kind of maps. That was my first job. And so it was a completely hands-on, hand-drawn. I mean, we used rulers and stuff to make straight lines, but that's about the extent of the technology. I came in after the lead type. I didn't have to do that, thank goodness, because I would have hated that. because I'm sure it smelled. So anyway, and I don't like the smells. And that was the one thing I didn't like about graphic art back then, because um, the typesetting was kind of a computer. It was a screen, but it was really big. It looked just like kind of like that, only it was actually, the one we used was actually bigger. You would sit and you would type in the words that you wanted. If you had a whole big paragraph, you'd sit there and write a paragraph one line at a time. And I was doing maps, so I was basically doing lists, like the names of streets, the names of highways, that sort of thing. So anyway, you type in one line at a time, and you proof it to make sure it's not any misspellings. And then you hit return, and it causes this photo paper to move in front of a wheel that had letters on it. So light would shine those letters through those letters. There were only certain sizes you could do too. You couldn't do like 12.5 point. It had to be 12 point or 14 point. It couldn't be anything in between. So anyway, it exposed this photo paper, took it through developer. Has anybody done any old school darkroom work? Nobody has? Well, I would never do it again in my entire life. It smells. So anyway, it goes through this developer solution, then it goes into fix solution, then it goes into a wash, and then it comes out into this little, out of this little thing that squirts out that has the dried and developed type you had just typed. And then you take this and you take your X-Acto knife and you put wax on the back of it. We had wax machines, put a little thin coat of wax, and it was real sticky. And you take your X-Acto knife, you cut out what you wanted to use, and then you pasted it onto your work. And every color, like we'll get into that later, every different color, like CMYK had a layer. You had a layer of paper, a layer of I used this film that I drew on. And anyway, you had to have a layer for every color. So needless to say, you're using all of these kinds of things. You're using pins that are not even shown here. You're using T-squares to make sure it's straight, because you could have lines going like this if you weren't careful. So anyway, it was a huge, as a matter of fact, see that little wheel up there? That's one of the ones that had the type on it. You can see that it only has certain sizes. So anyway, it was a thing. And something that would take me probably 15 or 20 minutes to do now on the computer might take 2 or 3 weeks to do it that way. So the reason I'm telling you all of that, because I'm sure that that's useless information that you'll never remember. You don't have to remember it. I'm just trying to make a point. About the time that when I finally, I got married and I moved to Dallas, and about the time that I got there, they started whispering about computers coming into the industry. And we were all scared to death. Oh my goodness, the computers are going to take our jobs. Oh my goodness. And if you didn't make the change, you were absolutely correct. I know a lot of people who were called paste up artists who no longer had jobs because they did not make that step. So let me see. I think I've got one more slide to show you because I love talking about the past. The real time that it started was 1983, when Macintosh came out with their very first computer called the Lisa. And it was a box. It was a box with the keyboard. It was all together and this little horrible mouse. And it really had bad resolution. So you couldn't do photographs or anything. It was mainly just for boxes, and it was all pixeled. So that was the start, and they cost in the neighborhood of $30,000. So they were I'm sorry, 9,000, almost 10,000. It's 30,000 in today's dollars. It was very expensive then. So not many people had them. But then every year, as technology goes, every year it was faster and cheaper and faster and cheaper until it got to the point that just about everybody was using it. By the end of the 80s, just about every place was using it. And I happened to work at a place that was kind of dragging their feet. They didn't want to change. Still, he was an airbrush artist and he just didn't want to change. So anyway, I was watching all this technology come about by going to the printer that we were using because we had this, it was a big full scale commercial printer, and they had all of these things that they were doing on computers. And a lot of the stuff was going away that I was used to and the processes that I was used to. And I decided I'm not going to do it. I'm going to get a different job and I'm not going to be a graphic artist anymore. So I got this job with, it was it was called Industrial Conveyors, and they needed somebody to do marketing. So I thought I can just get into this and not do graphic art anymore. Well, I kept getting pulled back in it because they knew that I was a graphic artist. So the next thing I know, I'm designing ads, I'm designing exhibits, I'm doing all of these things. So I finally said, okay, that's it. I'm going to buy a computer. And I bought a Macintosh. Not this one, thankfully. Mine was much more sophisticated. It had a whole gig of RAM. Can you imagine 1 gig of RAM? So slow. But anyway, that's how I finally got into it. 10 years later, I'm finally getting with it. And so then I decided to come back to Lubbock because this all happened in Dallas. So I came back to Lubbock and started working here on Tech Campus, and they were just about fully computerized. So I kind of taught myself how to do these softwares. I mean, we didn't have InDesign back then, but we did have Photoshop and we did have Illustrator. And so there were no classes to take. So I took the time to learn it myself, and I learned some things really wrong, and I had to relearn a lot. But anyway, the point is that I'm making that you've got to change with the times. Unless you want to completely change your career field, and actually, I don't know what that would be today, to not use artificial intelligence, because it's going to be in everything. So it's a tool. Artificial intelligence is just a tool. I mean, yeah, people can talk about, whoops, I'm going the wrong direction. People can talk about, and it was kind of a dumpster fire. I forgot about that. I was being really dramatic when I wrote this up. The thing that I want to tell you, my advice about artificial intelligence is to embrace it. And the reason I say embrace it is because it's here and it's going to be here, whether you like it or not. You can, ridiculous. Don't you hate spam? Okay, so I want to give you an example of a technology that was really cutting edge and scary to everybody. And I kind of divide people up into good people, like the ordinary common people like us, and then the bad, evil scientists. That's how I divide people up. So the scientists came up with nuclear power. And, they were going for the bomb. They really were back in those days. I don't know if you remember your history or not, but they were in a race with Germany. And it was like good against evil. Who's going to get to it first? Who's going to rule the world kind of stuff. So we did do it, and we did drop 2 bombs. And I don't know how you feel about that. I feel like that it would be a terrible thing to have to go through. I don't want to see it happen now. But the fact is, it did happen. So here, we got into the nuclear age. And so the people who wanted to start with nuclear power and start making electricity with it that's clean and all of this kind of stuff were overpowered by these people who were afraid of it. So they were saying, no, it's going to kill us all. It's terrible. We can't do it. And I mean, they marched and they protested, and we did not do it very much. I mean, we've got a few power plants, but not to the extent that was really originally thought of. But who did keep on doing nuclear stuff? Well, in my mind, it's kind of the bad people, because they're using it for military weapons. And so here's a technology that could have freed us from all of the fossil fuels and everything else, and we didn't use it because people were afraid. But the bad people didn't stop. So if you're afraid of AI, think of it like that if all the regular people and the good people look at AI and say, yeah, I'm going to use that as a tool. I'm going to keep it so that it's just a tool, and so it doesn't do Skynet and take over the world and kill us all. So just embrace it. Don't be afraid of it. Don't shy away, because there are a lot of people who will use it. So just be one of the good guys. Okay. I had so many thoughts when I was getting this done. So please bear with me. Do any of you know what the term singularity means, or the meaning of it now? They've kind of changed it. Yeah, it has something to do with the black hole. I think the first person who talked about it was Einstein when he was doing the relativity equation and all that kind of stuff. That was the center of a black hole. But now they're using it as the term of when the computing power, the technology gets to the point that AI can be um, basically a human, which I don't think that's ever going to happen, but people are talking about it. And so they are the singularity. When we reach singularity, they think that the computers will be smarter and faster than us and that we will be left behind. I don't think that's going to happen. If we use it, we won't be left behind. And there's another thing called Moore's Law. Have any of you heard that one? Okay. Moore's Law is basically meaning that every 2 years, technology, the speed, the capabilities, all the stuff doubles every 2 years. And that has been true for the last 50 years. So we've had 25 improvements. And instead of going like, okay, here's 10%, here's another 10%, it's like, well, that's not like you get 10% and then another 5% or something like that. It's like, it's much bigger than that. And I've got an example to show you. So if I were to say that I want to give you a penny a day and double it on the second day, like a penny on the first day, double it on the second, make it 4 on and then double the 2 on the next day, or $1 million, which one would you want to have? Are you saying the penny? That is very true. It sounds like you're not getting very much, but here's a chart that if you did it for 30 days, at the very end, you would have over $5 million, much better than the $1 million. So it's kind of like some kind of compound interest. That's how they also talk about it. But this is Moore's Law, and that's what we're doing. So instead of it being day 30, it would be day 60, but still every 2 years we're doubling the amount of computer power we have. So anyway, in this class, we are going to play with AI. All of the software have really easy to use, really accessible AI. And so I don't want you to get, there's a lot of your professors will tell you that you can't use AI in the classroom. Like if you're writing a paper, you can't use AI. And you do what they say because that's their classroom and they can tell you what to do. But Grammarly is AI and they encourage you to use Grammarly, right? Yes. Grammarly changes your grammar. It tells you how to put it in a better way. Like it'll take a sentence and restructure it. That is AI. It's here already. So in this class, when I say you can use AI, you can. If you're doing a project, let's say your children's book, if you decide you don't want to use the illustrations that I supply you, you may take AI and use it. But you can't say, okay, here are my drawings, Janice. I've done all these drawings. You've got to say illustrations by an artificial intelligence. That's all I ask. Give credit where credit is due. And that to me is the tool. I've used artificial intelligence in an actual ad. It was one of these freebie things that I'm always finding myself doing. It's for this group that it's a nonprofit. And they were having some kind of thing at Blue Skies. And I wanted to put a big, juicy hamburger on the ad. And I thought, do I want to look for a photograph or do I want to sit there and draw one in Illustrator? It'll probably take me an hour. And I decided I'm going to try AI. And it did a pretty decent job. I had to go in there and move some stuff around because there was some wonky lettuce. There was some cheese that wasn't dripping right and all that kind of stuff. But for the most part, I used it. And that to me is what AI is going to be. AI doesn't just suddenly pop up on your computer and say, hey, here's an ad for you. You are the driver. You are the one who puts in the parameters. You're the one who says, I want a 3-meat smash burger and with cheese and all the stuff on it. So you are the one who drives what AI makes. AI does not come up with anything on its own. I mean, it's there, it's a tool, and it's like taking a photograph. You don't create the thing you're taking a photograph of. You just use your camera, which is your tool, to make the photograph. So it's the same thing, but just give it credit. Is that a fair deal? Okay, I will get off my soapbox. I just really really feel strongly about it because I'm afraid that if we don't encourage you guys and to use it and to do it correctly and ethically, that you may be left behind at some point in your career. And I don't want that. I want everybody to have the best opportunity that they can. Okay, so let's go into another subject, industry terms and definitions. Now, you have in you have in Blackboard a thing called a workbook, and it has like gazillions of definitions, way more than what we're going to go over today. And we're going to go over definitions every time that we have a new software, because each software has their own definitions. And this is coming from our book. This is the book that I recommended. I have a Kindle copy of it. And so it's just basically an introduction, and it has a little workbook at the end. But I just liked the way that they laid out things. I liked the way that it was better than any of the books that I've used as far as layout and design. Okay, so some common terms. Bleed. Has anybody heard of that term before? We have some really terrible names in graphic design. Basically, if you have a page, and this is like a piece of paper, and you want the color to run off the edge, you don't go right up to the edge like this with the color, because if you take it to the printer and they print it just in the size that you give them, things can shift around a little bit. It can shift just a hair in the printer, or the big guillotine cutters when they're cutting the edges might slightly cut off, and you'll have, instead of having your nice continuous color, you're going to have a little bit of white showing. So what we do is we, all around the page, we do what's called a bleed. It's 1/8 of an inch on every side. So that means if you're doing an 8.5 by 11 page, you're going to have an 8 3/4 by 11 and 11, and let me just write it. I can write it easier. 11.25 by 8.75. So you've added 1/4 of an inch by adding that 1/8. Does that make sense? When we're going to take a tour of Slate Group, which is a really big commercial printer, and you'll see the printer, the cutters I'm talking about. You'll see the printers and you'll see the cutters. They're like these big things. They call them guillotine cutters. And they've got these big blades that come down, and they cut really fast, and they cut a whole lot of paper. But just so that we don't have just the tiniest little slip, we use a bleed. Okay, CMYK. I bet you've heard of that. Okay, it's cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Those are the colors that we use in printing. I'm mainly a print artist, so I find that it's very important that you know this. So CMYK is what you use for print. For RGB, for the web, we use RGB. Your screens are RGB. Your phones are RGB. Everything that has a screen is working in an RGB format, and that is red, green, and blue. And so that's simple. We'll be using that a lot, and especially with the web and video and stuff like that. Alignment. That means things lining up in a straight line or lining up in the same way. Like if you were to have some type, and here's the page, and you got this type, and you got here's this, and it all lines up on the left, that's called flush left. If you have things that are lining up in the center, that's called centered. It's kind of self-explanatory. If you have things that are lining up on the right, that's flush right. And then justified goes from one margin to the other. So that is what alignment is. So if I tell you do a centered alignment, that's what I mean. Make all of your text or all of your graphics or whatever it is that you're working with to be lined up in the center. Crop marks. It's very simple. It's whenever you're printing something and you've got this bleed, they've got to know where to cut. So you automatically put these little marks, and you don't have to draw these. I'll show you how to do them. So you've got these cut marks or crop marks. And there will not be a test on this. I'm not testing you guys for anything. I'm just wanting you to actually experience things. Okay, this is a word you're going to hear me say a lot in this class, hierarchy. What it means is whenever you're designing something, whether it's a business card, a book, a billboard, a web page, you've got to decide what is the most important thing. This is kind of like the user experience ideas of where do I lead the user's eyes? Where do I lead the reader's eyes? Because I'm trying to communicate. Remember that graphic design is a communication device. So you've got to decide what's going to be bigger, what's going to be bolder, and what doesn't, what level each one is at. Like, let's say you're doing a big ad and you've got the big headline, you've got the graphic, you've got some smaller information, and then you've got this tiny little legalese at the bottom, because you don't really care if people read about what the lawyers wrote. So you have that kind of a hierarchy. You would never want to put the legal stuff as the big headline, because that isn't something that you want to draw attention to. Okay, a pixel. Does everybody knows what it has heard of a pixel? Do you know what a pixel is? Kinda, okay. In Photoshop, in a photograph, I should say, a pixel is a square. And so photographs are made up of lots and lots of squares. Okay, so that's what a pixel is. And they do make up everything. So PPI stands for pixels per inch. If this were actually an inch by an inch, that would be 4 pixels. The standard for web is 72 pixels. The standard for high quality printing is 300 PPI. You might hear some people say DPI, and dots per inch is something that printers say, but they're basically the same thing. So if I accidentally say DPI, you know that I'm meaning PPI. It has to do with resolution. Okay, and so raster. Raster is an image that's made up of pixels. So anything we do in Photoshop is going to be a raster image. So that's what Photoshop is. Then on the other side of the coin is vector. And vector is actually geometry. I know you didn't know there was going to be math in this, did you? So with vector, you have a point, or as they call it in Illustrator, an anchor. If you have another anchor over here, and then you have an anchor over here, and you draw a line to the anchors, you make a shape. And the lines in between the anchors are called paths. So that is how Illustrator works. You know, you might use your pen to make those anchors. You might use a brush to make the anchors, and it will make them themselves if you're using a brush. So we'll get more into that later, but that's the difference between Photoshop and Illustrator, and for that matter, InDesign, because raster is Photoshop and vector is Illustrator. Okay, I'm to the end of that slide. You know, I've got a little clicker that will change that, but I never can make it work for some reason. So that's why I'm running back and forth. Do any of y'all use hotkeys or shortcuts on your computer? You do. Thank goodness. That seems to be the thing that I never quite communicate to the class. So this time I'm really taking a lot more effort to do that. So what I want is someone to hand these out for me. Could you hand these out for me? They're just, I've got them collated and everything. So take one, and I think I've got enough there for everybody. This basic Mac OS. How many of you are going to be using Macs? Okay. And it also has a Windows. So if you're going to use Windows, that's fine. The only problem with using a Windows machine is I don't know the key commands for Windows. They have a tendency to be just slightly different than Apple. So this should help you. These are the basic ones that are for all of the programs. Like if you're using Word, these will work. If you're doing Excel, if you're doing any kind of crazy, strange software that I can't even think of, these hotkeys or shortcuts will work for your computer. So I wanted to include this. You can even get little stickers to put on your laptop if you really, really want to do that. Or you can make some kind of thing where you can refer back to this. It's really super handy to know these things. Okay, so let's start with this one. And I'm going to move my slideshow up a little bit. Okay, so I have a little circle, a little box around the most important part. I mean, there's a lot of key commands on here, and I can probably tell you that I don't use all of them either. Some of them just don't get used often enough, especially the shortcuts for the tools. I really don't use those very much, but I do use the two that are in the red box a lot. It keeps you from having to go up to the menu and back down and click and back and forth and back and forth. It cuts down the time that it takes you to do stuff by a lot. So those key shortcuts, try and memorize them because we'll be using them a lot. And then let's see, Illustrator also has two boxes that are really, really super important to learn. It'll cut down the time by about half of how long it takes you to do something. So be sure to kind of look those over and keep this handy so that you'll be able to navigate easier. Okay, and then InDesign. Also, the top two, the file and the edit. That will be so handy for you to know those key shortcuts. So I'm going to also talk about the tools. I put them all side by side because they're so similar. I don't want you to think that you have to completely relearn a bunch of icons every time we start a new software, because it's not true. So you can see in Photoshop, it has a move tool instead of selection tools. Their selection tools are totally different in Photoshop than they are in Illustrator or InDesign. And there's crop tools that are strictly Photoshop. You might ask, why aren't they all exactly the same? Why isn't the menu exactly the same in every software? Well, number one, there are different functions for each software. Number two, and this is probably more a reason than any, is that Adobe has teams working on each software. It's not like some team is working on the entire thing. Each software has their own team. So that's why some of the key commands don't match up. And that's been a big thing for me. I just don't understand why they can't at least get together with the key commands, because they're different across the software. But in generalities, they are basically the same. In Photoshop down here, we have foreground and background. And then in both of these, we have stroke and fill. And they're always at the same place. We've got magnifying glasses and all of those sorts of things. Anyway, you can look at those and you can see which ones are similar. And you might even want to have I think I gave you no, I did not. Well, I tell you what, I meant to print out this sheet. I'll print one out and give it to you next time because we're going to start in Photoshop on Thursday. We're going to start diving into it, and Photoshop is probably the most fun for everybody. You'll be able to do some really fun things really quickly. So anyway, those are all of the tools. Then there's one more thing I want, whoops, that is not in the, oh yes, it is. Sorry. This is Photoshop. It's just a photo of the window. I just kind of want you to see how things are laid out. The tools are always on all the softwares, everyone, Illustrator, InDesign, all of them. The toolbars are always here. And then the boxes that have information and stuff like that are always here. So you can, every window, every working surface looks pretty much the same, excuse me, the same from one software to another. And this is the AI bar. They call it the task bar, I think. I can't remember what the name of it is. Let me get to this. Yes, it's the prompt bar. So every one of them have a prompt bar, and you can move that around. If it kind of gets in the way sometimes, and you can just grab the left side of it and move it out of the way. So on every window that you're going to be using in every software, there are some icons that I want you to be familiar with. So starting at the top, there's that little, in the toolbar, there's sort of a triangle, a right angle triangle, whatever it is. That means that there are more tools underneath that top tool. If it does not have one of those, that's all you get. That if there's no triangle there, that means that tool is the only one there. But if you've got a triangle, you have to hover over and then click, and a menu will pop out, and you can choose different tools. I sort of wish they didn't hide them like that, because sometimes they do hide them pretty well. Whatever tool you used last will show up on the top as long as you're working on it. So you won't have to look for it but once. Okay, then moving over, we've got that little chain here in the center. That has several meanings. Chains mean that that images are linked and that they're also, the image is proportional. Okay, so the chain linked. That's probably something that you kind of understand, but let me just get a little deeper in what linked means. If you have a photograph that is linked in InDesign, that means that the photograph lives somewhere else. You probably have a folder full of photographs, and you've taken one of those photographs and linked it to your InDesign. That means that you have this placeholder image. It won't print well, but it's still showing you where it is, and you know, it shows you what it's going to look like. But it has this address. So let's say that it has an address that's in this file, in this drive, and so on. It just basically shows you where it's at. So if you were to go to this original photograph and change the name of it, that link is broken. If you move that file, the link is broken and you have to relink it, or it's not, or you're going to have an error message. Does that make sense? Okay. So if that is together, that means that your image is linked. If it's broken, that means the link is broken. It also means proportional, and that's kind of hard. I wish they'd use two different symbols, but they don't. They use a chain for that also. If you have a box and if you want to draw a box that's 4 inches by 3 inches, and then you decide that you don't want it to be that, and you've got it locked so it's proportional, then if you change one, it's going to change the other one. We'll get into that when we start drawing boxes, but it does have two different meanings. Okay, up here, the top one, open and close panels. Remember, I showed you the panels on the screen. Let me get back to that. Okay, so I showed you these panels. They have tiny little double greater than marks, and they're pointing one direction and they're pointing the other. You click on one of those, and it either if it's open, it closes it. If it's closed, it opens it. So that's the way you can make them go away, or you can open them up so you can use them. This will all make more sense when we start using the software. 4 lines like that right below it that looks like just maybe 4 books stacked on top of each other or whatever, or 4 lines, that means that there's a menu there. If you click it, a menu will fly out and you'll have a lot more options. Let's see. This lock means that it's a locked layer. It can also mean that it's a locked object, but we'll get into that more. So, but just know that a lock is a lock. Okay. And then, of course, this is the prompt bar. And depending on what tool you have chosen, the information in here will change. Okay. I know that's a lot, but I just wanted you to kind of have an overview of what Adobe software is going to look like.